Lord Boswell, Chair of the House of Lords, European Union Select Committee. Your committee is conducting an inquiry into the visions of EU reform. What is the focus of this inquiry?
Well, it builds on work we've already done on the beginning of this complex process about British renegotiation, the EU referendum which will come, although that's not strictly our responsibility because that's a British domestic piece of politics, if you like, and also the question about the future of the European Union, which is part of our remit and clearly plays into the negotiations. And our earlier inquiry was looking very much at the process, saying who is talking to whom and who's in charge of this, and when will we know and how will Parliament be informed and so forth. And this inquiry maintains some of that momentum because obviously we're now in a position to say, and how did it go and has it worked, and are there things that were not ideal or optimal in it. And then we're also looking at the extent to which the British government, having said it wants reform, has put forward various proposals in the so-called famous 4 baskets of proposals, and we want to see how much that is coincident with current thinking across the European Union, both at the institutional level and to some extent clearly at the political level, national parliaments, but also European Parliament, and seeing the extent to which those are reconcilable and are or might be being reconciled.
You met with one of the most important actors today, Jonathan Faull, who's leading the European Commission's task force on the EU-UK referendum. What do you think, from your conversation with Jonathan Faull, what do you think the most difficult issues will be?
Yeah, I should make it clear that we actually spoke to him on the record, and therefore, of course, his views will be on the record clearly in due course. But I think what was interesting was that there was a sense of reporting a degree of political consensus around resolving the British issues and springing, I think, from the European Council in December. And then we went through the issues. I think it is clear from both what he said and other contacts we've had even today that it's not solely about the migration issue, which people sometimes say it is, although I think that is still seen as being, in a sense, the most hard-edged political issue to be resolved, and one which excites the interest of other member states, for example. And also, I think separately, is the issue about providing the necessary legal and administrative infrastructure and input to make it possible to effect a deal when the heads of government have reached a political decision to have one.
One of Prime Minister Cameron's demands has been for better regulation. You also met with Frans Timmermans, first Vice President of the European Commission today, who is responsible for better regulation. Do you think that both the Prime Minister and his party and the public at large will be convinced at the EU's efforts to improve how it regulates?
Well, I should say, of course, in the case of both Jonathan Faull and Frans Timmermans, they're not the first time we've met them as a committee. I mean, we work very closely with them, both on the earlier inquiries and also on better regulation. Now, Frans Timmermans did not want to speak on the record today, and I can understand the sensitivities of that. And we were not primarily talking about better regulation, although some of that was obviously in discussion, not least because it's one of the Prime Minister's competitiveness agenda issues. But all I would say is the exchanges we had were positive and encouraging.
And you, of course, are a member of the House of Lords, part of the national parliament. Would you like to see a stronger role for national parliaments?
Yes, is the short answer. We would. I think it's very important that it's a properly directed role for national parliaments. I mean, first of all, we don't want to supplant the European Parliament. I'm not sure, for example, I want to be flying over here once a week for a trilogue negotiation. I have things to do in my own Parliament. We also don't want politically to get at odds with the European Parliament, because having a fallout between national and European level parliamentarians is a kind of zero-sum game, which some administrators, the more cynical of them, might welcome. I mean, we want to work with them. Having said that, I think there is a strong interest because national parliaments are relatively close to their electorates. And I always say, if you're anticipating the point, if you're looking at the House of Lords, we're not elected, we don't have a democratic mandate, though some of us have in the past in different capacities, but we do have a democratic obligation, which is to inform people and look at it. And we work well with other national parliaments through the machinery which is in place, COSAC and so forth. So there's a strong interest in doing it. I think in fairness, when the British government put forward its proposals, it was very much emphasising the negative, better ways of controlling, reining in, preventing Euro action. Well, to some extent, there's been a degree of self-regulation by the Commission, for example. They are no longer putting forward quite the scale of legislation which had been previously apparent, and they're also, as you know, working at deregulation, as you've mentioned. But we also feel, as a House, partly because we have access to the work of our specialist subcommittees, that there's a positive role for national parliaments as well, which is why we've said, if you want a red card, that's fine. There may be occasions where it's appropriate to do that. And certainly in relation to yellow cards, we would want to improve the machinery to make it possible for national parliaments in practice to object if they felt strongly, and then to get a proper answer to reasoned opinions in yellow cards and proper Commission action. But also we think there should be an opportunity for green cards, things we can put forward, and we in fact pioneered that as a committee in putting forward proposals on food waste which fed into the circular economy package, and where we have had, as a matter of record, a positive response from Timmermans and the Commission.
The government commissioned a review of competencies in 2012. According to legend, you're the only person who has read this in its entirety.
I've never claimed to be the only person, but I am one of the few who has, yes.
Generally speaking, that was a positive review, and it came out with some very positive statements. Do you think more could have been done to promote the outcome?
I mean, it's for the government to explain the motivation which caused them to set it up and the way in which they conducted it. But we did an inquiry in March, just before the general election, so it was to some extent buried in the noise of that campaign, in which we really said two things. The first was that it was a worthwhile exercise. It was well conducted, and we said that, and it generally reflected a fairly sensible allocation of the competencies at different levels. A matter which we always, I think, find difficulty in Britain with, because we don't have the kinds of federal arrangement which, say, Germany has, even with the Constitutional Court, where they're used to sharing out competencies formally at different levels. Second thing we said was, you promised, Her Majesty's government promised, that we would have a summative report on the conclusions from the consequences. It never happened, and we thought that was a mistake, and indeed would have been useful in setting out the issues ahead of the negotiations and ahead of a referendum campaign.
Finally, your report will be ready in March.
That's what we're planning, yes.
Do you think it will be an important contribution to the public debate?
I think it will help. I think we will show light on the process. I think we will open some avenues of interest to people about the coincidence of vision or cases where that doesn't quite coincide. I mean, obviously, we're not in a position, not least because we haven't taken all the evidence yet, to say what's going to be in it. What I think it won't do and wouldn't claim to do is, as it were, to provide a knockout single blow or text for the referendum campaign. That will be for people to decide as electors. And if we made any contribution to making people better informed, I think that will be to the benefit of both sides in that referendum debate.
Will your inquiry also look at the alternatives to EU membership? Obviously, we're asking the electorate to make a choice. Will you be looking at the EEA, the EFTA, free trade agreements? Many possibilities have been put forward.
No, we won't. It's not formally in the terms of our inquiry. We obviously have taken an interest in some of the options. We have done a bit of work on the implications of a withdrawal under Article 50 in terms of the legal implications, and some of the administrative ones. It maybe will reflect on whether we might do something further in that area. But of course, we're rather anxious not to clutter it up into the political controversy, and it's really for those on either side of that argument to make. And for the record, our researchers suggest that there are 7 alternative options. I'm not sure I could list them, and I'm not sure you'd want me to, but it will become a very complex debate. And I think all we're anxious to do in anything we do is not to go beyond our powers, not go beyond our evidence, and broadly set out the stall of information on which people can at least select as part of the process of informing themselves to make a very decisive and important vote.
Finally, your report will be ready in March.
And that's what we're planning, yes.
Do you think it will be an important contribution to the public debate?
I think it will help. I think we will show light on the process. I think we will open some avenues of interest to people about the coincidence of vision or cases where that doesn't quite coincide. I mean, obviously, we're not in a position, not least because we haven't taken all the evidence yet, to say what's going to be in it. What I think it won't do and wouldn't claim to do is, as it were, to provide a knockout single blow or text for the referendum campaign. That will be for people to decide as electors. And if we made any contribution to making people better informed, I think that will be to the benefit of both sides in that referendum debate.